The winter of 1883 had arrived early, bringing with it a brittle fog that clung to the edges of the moor and the skeletal branches of the oaks that bordered Dorrington Hollow. The village itself seemed to exist between breaths, a place where time moved at its own hesitant pace. Few travellers ventured this far, and fewer still returned with coherent tales. It was a settlement of hushed voices, shuttered windows, and a pervasive sense that the land remembered more than it ought. Edmund Hale arrived on a horse-drawn cart, the wheels crunching over frost-hardened soil. He was a historian by trade, carrying notebooks bound in soft leather, inkpots and a pocket watch whose ticking was sharp against the silence of the hollow. His arrival did not cause a stir. The villagers watched him with measured curiosity, their eyes reflecting the muted grey of the winter sky, yet their silence carried a weight he could not ignore. The cottage he rented sat on the edge of the moor, near the river, whose waters whispered to the rocks as if repeating secrets only it could understand. Edmund unpacked his belongings, carefully laying out his notebooks, and set about observing the village and its peculiar rhythms. In the days that followed, he noticed anomalies that gnawed at his sense of reason, clocks that seemed to skip, shadows that lingered longer than they should, and the faint impression of voices that vanished when he strained to hear them. At night, the wind carried strange sounds across the moor, whispers, laughter, cries of despair, all indistinguishable, yet heavy with intent. Edmund, ever rational, assumed it was the moor's natural song. Yet he could not shake the feeling of being watched, as though the village itself regarded him not with curiosity, but with a quiet judgment. His studies of the parish records provided no comfort. They were inconsistent, strange, and sometimes contradictory. Events repeated decades apart, and dates shifted inexplicably. One entry froze him in place, a page penned with an elegant hand he knew instantly. The date, 1833, the name Edmund Hale. Disappeared into the moor, never returned. He laughed nervously, a brittle sound in the cold cottage. 50 years had passed. It could not be him. Yet every fibre of his being insisted otherwise. The village priest, an old man with eyes that seemed to have absorbed the mist itself, warned him when he inquired. "Some doors," he murmured, "should remain closed. Not all who enter them return the same. And some, Mr. Hale, are meant to be forgotten by time itself." That night Edmund lay awake. The fog pressed against the windows, moving in slow, deliberate waves. His pocket watch, normally a steady comfort, stuttered and skipped seconds. He could hear it, erratic and defiant, as though it were alive, counting not hours but fragments of reality. By dawn, an irresistible urge pulled him from the cottage. He wrapped a scarf tightly about his neck, lit a lantern, and ventured into the moor. The frost crunched beneath his boots. Fog clung to his coat, his hair, his skin, until it felt less like a covering and more like a second skin. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed in silence. Time itself seemed fractured, folding in on itself with each step he took. Then, amidst the shifting fog, he saw it, a stone archway half buried in moss, standing solitary against the moor, as though it had been waiting for him since the beginning of the world. The carvings were worn by centuries of wind and rain, but they still shimmered faintly with an unnatural light. He traced his fingers across the stone, and the words etched there seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Not all who walk forward return the same. A subtle vibration rose within his chest, insistent and alien. His watch spun in his hand, the hands dancing erratically. Seconds became hours. Hours collapsed into nothing. A sudden gust swept across the moor, carrying with it whispers of lives he had never lived, and voices that seemed strangely familiar. He stepped forward. The world collapsed. The moor vanished beneath him. The air thickened, pressing against his lungs, and then nothing. When Edmund opened his eyes, he was still standing on the moor, yet the landscape had changed. The river was narrower, the trees younger, and the village in the distance looked unscathed, new, almost pristine. The church rose in fresh stone, windows unblemished by time. Villagers walked the streets, turning to regard him with faces he recognized yet could not place. "Mr. Hale," a young priest called, unlined and bright-eyed. "You've returned. I don't understand," Edmund stammered. "I was here. This morning," the priest frowned. "Mr. Hale, it has been 50 years since you vanished." Time pressed against him in a suffocating embrace. 50 years, yet he had not aged. His watch ticked normally again, a cruel mockery of stability. The village moved on without him, and he was left suspended, a stranger in a familiar world. Days passed, and Edmund attempted to reconcile the impossible. He wandered the village cautiously, observing villagers going about lives he had never lived, their movements almost spectral. His own home had long since crumbled, replaced by ivy-choked ruins. Records marked him as returned, yet the graveyard held a stone bearing his name and the dates 1810-1833. At night, the world shifted further. Shadows clung too long to walls. Reflections moved independently. Edmund saw versions of himself in the darkened windows, old, young, vanished entirely, all staring back with terror and understanding mingled. Sleep brought no relief, only visions of the archway, the river, and the moor stretched into infinity. He came to understand that the village, the moor, the river, even the church itself, was not bound by ordinary time. It existed in layers, overlapping centuries and moments. Each step he took, each heartbeat, folded the past and future over one another. And then, on a morning that might have been forever, the village froze. Birds hovered in the air mid-flight. The river stood glassy and still. The villagers were suspended mid-motion, as if time itself had caught them in a trap. Only Edmund could move. Only he could breathe. At the edge of the moor he saw the archway again, pulsating with an unearthly glow. The carvings had changed. You have stepped out of time. You may not step back. Edmund felt a force pulling him forward. The moor, the river, the trees, the villagers, all converged into a single point of unbearable awareness. His body stretched across centuries. His mind fractured and expanded simultaneously. He saw himself as a child, an old man, a man lost in the moor, a shadow and nothing. Each iteration whispered, screamed, or stared silently, eyes wide with the terror of eternity. From the chaos, a voice emerged. Calm, intimate, and impossible, Edmund Hale, you sought the river of time. You stepped outside its current. You cannot return. He tried to resist, to flee, but the archway's light pressed upon him, older than the village, older than humanity, older than time itself. Then he saw her, a figure beyond mortal comprehension, eyes like stars, hair flowing like the river, calm yet terrifying. She spoke without words. Her gaze revealed the archway's secrets, the inevitability of his fate, and the realization that time is not a river, but a labyrinth. Edmund was now a prisoner and witness, minutes or centuries unpassed. His consciousness stretched and unraveled, yet remained intact. The archway contracted, then expanded, pulling him deeper into its essence. Outside, Dorrington Hollow, the river, the moor, and his cottage, all frozen, repeating, irrelevant. Edmund understood his role, guardian of moments, keeper of time's fragile thread, observer but never participant. When he opened his eyes again, the archway was gone. Shadows moved in impossible ways, villagers frozen and fluid, repeated lives in overlapping sequences. His reflection appeared fractured in the river, multiple versions of himself staring back, some young, some old, some vanished. He was alone, yet surrounded. He had become a man outside time, walking the moor forever. Travelers at twilight whisper of a man in old-fashioned clothes, moving silently, his eyes pale yet full of knowledge too vast for mortal minds. On nights when the wind hums strangely and the moon glints on the river, they hear a faint, irregular ticking, almost like breathing. Those who listen closely swear he steps quietly beside them, unseen outside time, forever observing the world that flows without him. The moor had changed. What had once seemed frozen, silent and unyielding, now pulsed with subtle motion, as though time itself had gained a heartbeat. Edmund Hale walked carefully, every step measured, the frost crunching beneath his boots sounding impossibly loud in the suspended world. Shadows bent unnaturally around him, as if moving independently, reaching for him and recoiling, testing him, teasing his perception of reality. He paused to catch his breath near the river. Its waters, still yet flowing, reflected not only the sky but fragments of himself. A boy scribbling in a notebook, an old man bent with sorrow, the version of him that had vanished decades ago. The reflection shifted as he watched, cycling endlessly through ages and moments he had not yet, or had already lived. The archway called to him again. Though it was gone from view, he felt its pull, insistent, magnetic, as if time itself were a rope tied around his chest, dragging him towards something he could neither name nor resist. He tried to focus, grounding himself in what little familiarity remained. The river's whisper, the moor's frozen grass, the faint scent of moss and stone. And then he saw them. The villagers. Or echoes of them. Their forms flickered like candle flames caught in the wind. Faces pale, eyes vacant, lips moving but producing no sound. Some carried baskets, some guided children who were simultaneously small and old. Others repeated conversations that had happened decades apart. He understood with growing horror. He was walking among all versions of Dorrington Hollow at once, stitched together by the fractured flow of time. Past, present, future, each layer bleeding into the other. Edmund tried to speak, to ground himself. "I am here. I am still human," he whispered. But his voice did not return. It carried differently across the fog, echoing as though coming from behind, from the future or the past. It frightened him, as if another version of himself were answering, mocking, warning. He dropped to his knees, pressing his hands to the frozen ground, feeling vibrations beneath his fingertips, the pulse of reality bending and stretching. And then he saw her, a figure beyond comprehension, standing at the center of the moor where the archway had once risen. Her eyes were like distant stars, impossibly deep, reflecting centuries in a single glance. Her hair flowed like the river, shifting and moving as though alive. She did not speak, yet her presence communicated more than words could convey. The archway's purpose, his displacement, the inevitability of his fate. Time was not a current to be followed. It was a trap, and he had stepped into it. Edmund felt himself drawn toward her, yet resisted. His body stretched across moments, centuries folding over him like waves. In the blink of an instant, he saw himself as a child, scribbling furiously in his notebooks. Himself as a young scholar, trembling in the first cold of the hollow. Himself as an old man, bent with sorrow, hopeless. He saw himself vanish into the moor, appear again and again, endlessly. Each version a ghost witnessing the same events from different vantage points. The archway's light pulsed in the fog, bending reality around it. The villagers, frozen yet flickering, repeated their lives in loops and layers, unaware of his presence or perhaps unable to perceive it. Time pressed on him, a heavy weight, and yet he was untouchable, dislocated beyond reach. He realized he was neither living nor dead, neither present nor absent. The figure's gaze enveloped him. Her silent communication revealed the pattern. The archway, the village, the moor, the river, all bound in a cycle that could not be broken. He understood then that he had become more than a man. He was now an observer, a sentinel, a keeper of moments. He could witness but not participate. He could remember but not change. Minutes, or were they hours? Stretched into centuries. His consciousness unraveled and reassembled with every heartbeat, folding the river of time upon itself. He felt the echo of every step he had taken, every choice, every life he had intersected with. And always the archway pulsed, its invisible force urging him to step further, to surrender entirely to the flow beyond time. He walked through the village, moving among the flickering, suspended villagers. They repeated their lives like clockwork, yet he alone could perceive the layers. A child ran past him, but the child's face shifted into the visage of an adult. Then old age, then youth again, all in a single heartbeat. A man carried a basket of bread. The bread aged into mold, returned to flour, reappeared, decayed, reformed. The impossibility of it left him dizzy, unmoored yet fully aware. The woman beyond time drew closer, her presence filling the moor. He could sense the tension in her gaze, the inevitability of her will. She did not speak, yet he understood her perfectly. Stepping into the archway, stepping outside time, had irrevocably altered him. He had crossed a threshold not meant for mortals. There would be no return. And then he saw himself. Countless versions, all mirroring, all staring, some whispering, some screaming, some silently imploring him to remember, to act, to flee. The multiplicity of himself was overwhelming. Their eyes held the terror of knowing what lay beyond the river of time, of perceiving eternity without the comfort of its limits. A sudden sound echoed across the moor, a ticking unlike any clock he had known. Irregular, inconsistent, a heartbeat that was also not a heartbeat. It filled the space around him, reverberating in his chest. The villagers froze mid-step. The wind held its breath. Even the river stilled, and Edmund felt the impossible pull of countless seconds folding upon themselves. Time, he realized, had become tangible. He could feel it in the frost beneath his boots, in the fog that clung to his hair, in the very air he breathed. And within that realization came understanding. He was the witness, the keeper, the sentinel. His life was no longer measured in years or days, but in observation. Every moment of the village, the river, the moor, even himself, was now his alone to perceive. The archway shimmered faintly in the distance, though it had no form. The woman's gaze remained, her presence eternal, calm yet menacing. Edmund approached, knowing he could never pass through, could never touch it again. It existed only as a reminder of the choices that had brought him here, of the reality he could never undo. And in that stillness, he made peace. Not with the world, not with the villagers, not with the river, but with himself. He understood the necessity of his role. He was a guardian of time's fragile thread, an observer, a man who had stepped beyond the current of reality and remained endlessly a sentinel. The moor stretched infinitely. Shadows shifted, villages flickered, the river shimmered with impossible light. Edmund moved among them, silent, unnoticed, aware of every fold of reality around him. Every heartbeat, every breath, every blink of an eye was layered with centuries, and he carried them all within him. Travelers crossing Dorrington Hollow in twilight sometimes glimpse him. A man in old-fashioned clothes, moving with purpose yet aimless, eyes pale yet deep with knowledge. Some say he is lost, others claim he warns them. On nights when the wind hums strangely and the moon glints on the river, a faint, irregular ticking can be heard, almost like a breath, almost like a heartbeat, almost alive, and those who listen closely swear that the man steps quietly beside them, unseen outside of time, a witness to moments that will never flow normally again. The moor had grown stranger still. Frosted grass bent unnaturally. The fog wove itself into shapes that suggested movement, and the river, once a quiet companion, now sang in tones that were almost human. Edmund Hale walked its edges, aware of every fold in the landscape, every flicker in the villagers who repeated their motions endlessly. Time itself had become a texture he could touch, a rhythm he could feel in his chest. He had learned to navigate it, to observe without intervening. Yet each day, each century, or perhaps each minute, it was impossible to measure, wore upon him. The villagers moved like ghosts across his perception, their lives overlapping, intersecting, repeating. A baker kneaded bread while simultaneously crumbling it into dust. Children played and aged into old men mid-laughter. Conversations layered upon each other like distorted music, each echoing infinitely. Edmund moved among them, invisible, untouchable, carrying the burden of understanding all at once. He saw his younger self, scribbling in his notebooks on the edge of the moor, oblivious to what was to come. He saw himself as the man who had first arrived, tentative and curious. And he saw the man he had become, stretched thin across centuries, a witness to all things yet belonging to none. The archway remained absent, yet its influence lingered like the aftertaste of smoke. He could feel the pull of it in his chest, urging him, reminding him of the moment he had stepped beyond the river of time. The woman, the figure beyond comprehension, appeared at intervals. A shimmer in the mist, a reflection in the river, a fleeting shadow among the trees. She did not speak, yet her presence conveyed inevitability. She had set the stage. He had walked into it. Now he was to endure the consequences. Edmund's reflection in the river now held infinite forms. Young, old, vanished, ghostly, all versions of him existed simultaneously. Some screamed silently, their eyes wide with terror at what lay beyond the currents of time. Others watched him patiently, resigned to the role of observer. He understood with a bone-deep certainty that he had become more than mortal. He was a nexus, a point where time folded upon itself, a bridge and a sentinel. The fog thickened, coiling around his legs, whispering faintly in tones that were both his own voice and not his own. "You are here. You are there. You are nowhere." The words were in every direction at once, and yet he understood them perfectly. The air hummed, resonating with the echoes of every heartbeat he had ever felt and would ever feel. It was then he noticed the subtle changes in the villagers. Some began to repeat gestures from centuries ago. A man carrying a lantern paused mid-step, then moved again as if decades of time had passed in a heartbeat. A woman folded her hands, then straightened, then folded again over and over. Their existence was a mosaic of time's fractures, and he moved among them as the only constant. Edmund wandered to the river's edge. Its surface shimmered with a strange spectral light, reflecting all versions of the village at once. In its depths he glimpsed himself, multiplied endlessly. The boy, the young scholar, the vanished man, the old sentinel. They reached for him, called to him, yet he could not respond. He was tethered to the present in a way he had never been tethered to life, and yet the present had become meaningless. The figure appeared again, this time on the far bank of the river. She raised her hand, a gesture so subtle it might have been mistaken for nothing, yet it carried the weight of centuries. Time itself seemed to bend toward her, and Edmund felt the pull stronger than ever. He stepped forward instinctively, yet the river's waters did not wet his feet. They rippled in impossible patterns, reflecting worlds that had yet to exist and others long gone. In that moment, Edmund felt a strange serenity, not peace exactly, but a clarity born of eternal observation. He understood that the archway had not trapped him out of cruelty. It had given him purpose, a role that transcended life and death. He was a guardian of moments, a witness to the fragile thread of reality. He could not change events, but he could see them, remember them, and bear their weight. The villagers continued their endless repetitions. Children aged, lovers embraced, arguments began and ended, all unfolding in loops he could perceive. And always the fog whispered, the river hummed, the moor stretched infinite. Edmund moved among them, silent, unseen, carrying the knowledge of all that had been and all that would be. He approached the site of his original arrival, where the archway had first pulsed in the fog. Though it no longer existed, he felt its echo in every stone, every blade of grass, every ripple in the river. He knelt, pressing his hands to the ground, feeling the rhythm of the fractured world. The sensation was overwhelming. Centuries condensed into a heartbeat, lifetimes layered upon lifetimes. And yet he endured because he must. The hours, minutes, or centuries passed indistinguishably. He watched the village at twilight, as travelers from outside Dorrington Hollow occasionally crossed the moor. Some glimpsed him, a man in old-fashioned clothes, moving silently, eyes distant yet penetrating. Whispers followed their footsteps. The man who walks outside time. Others laughed nervously, thinking it a trick of the mist. None truly understood. Night fell, though even night was ambiguous in a world outside normal time. The river reflected a moon that lingered far too long, shadows that stretched impossibly, and stars that shifted slowly across the sky. A faint ticking sounded in the distance, irregular, inconsistent, almost like breathing. It echoed across the moor, brushing against the frozen villagers, brushing against him. He recognized the sound instantly, his own heartbeat, multiplied infinitely. A signal that time, even fractured, continued to pulse through existence. The fog parted briefly, revealing the figure once more. Her eyes met his across the moor. Though she remained silent, her expression conveyed inevitability, understanding, and a quiet warning. Edmund knew now that he would never leave Dorrington Hollow. He would walk its moors forever. A man outside time, guardian of centuries, witness to moments that would never flow normally again. He began walking again, moving silently through the frozen and flickering village. Each step was a thread through infinity, each breath a bridge across centuries. The river sang, the wind whispered, the fog wrapped him in its embrace. And somewhere beyond, the archway pulsed faintly in memory, a reminder of the path he had taken and the fate he could never escape. Travelers who wander Dorrington Hollow at twilight speak of him still. A man in clothes of another century, moving silently, eyes empty yet deep with knowledge too vast for mortal minds. They hear the irregular ticking in the wind, see shadows shift impossibly, and sometimes swear that the man walks beside them, unseen, outside time, observing, silent, eternal. The moor stretches endlessly, the river hums its spectral tune, and Edmund Hale walks forever. His reflection flickers across centuries, a mosaic of life and death, youth and age, presence and absence. He is a man beyond mortality, a sentinel, a witness, a ghost of time itself, and if you wander too close on a moonlit night, when the fog coils low across the moor and the river glimmers with impossible light, you might hear it. The faint, irregular ticking of a watch long broken, echoing across the hollow, almost like breathing, almost alive, and you might catch a glimpse of him. a man who steps beside you, silent. Outside time watching the world that never stops while he does.